Maintenant la séance.
Welcome.
Off the top, some housekeeping. I know my idea of having some quick committee meetings on December 18th went over like a lead balloon, both on the government side as well as opposition members. So just to relieve everyone, Santa's coming early. We're not going to do that. So we will. I expect we're going to adjourn Parliament on or recess Parliament on Tuesday. So there won't be a Wednesday meeting, as I had just floated and mused. There's already a link that's gone out, an update that's gone out for Wednesday with line by lines. The clerk and I have been unable to secure the witnesses that the subcommittee had prioritized, largely because of just unavailability. I think that's every last one. So, as the subcommittee recommended, we're going to use the time we have for line by line. You'll note that on Wednesday we'll tackle Report 7, and then Monday it is my intention, all this notice hasn't gone out yet, to then pick up Report 8, Benefit Delivery Modernization Program, which is tied to it. I would like to tackle that while it's still fresh in our mind, and then any other time remaining we'll continue to go through our list. So that's it for the update. Wednesday's notice went out just for this meeting, and we will get Monday's out in the next day or two, but just so you know, it is my intention to have another round of line by line. Bienvenue à la réunion numéro 157 du comité permanent.
Welcome to meeting number 157 of the committee.
Pursuant to the standing orders, members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Before we begin, I'd like to ask all in-person participants to read the guidelines written on the updated cards on the table. This is with respect to the audio system, which you're all familiar with. And a kind reminder to all those in person and online that for the safety of our interpreters, that it is very important that your microphone is muted when you're not speaking. Merci à toute votre coopération.
Thank you all for your cooperation. Pursuant to Standing Order 1083G, the committee is resuming its study of report number 8 of the Auditor General, Canada Emergency Business Account, and it was sent to committee on December 2nd, 2024.
From the Office of the Auditor General, Karen Hogan, Auditor General of Canada, Andrew Hayes, Deputy Auditor General, and Melanie Cabana, Principal. Nice to have you all back again so soon. And from the Department of Finance, Chris Forbes, Deputy Minister. Thank you for coming in, along with your colleague, Julien Brazeau, Associate Assistant Deputy Minister, Financial Sector Policy Branch. Ms. Hogan, you have the floor for any opening comments you might or might not have. I know we just had you in. Of course, the floor is yours for up to 5 minutes if you would like.
Chair?
It's a point of order, Ms. Khalid.
Yes, I believe that my colleague, Mr. Erskine Smith, is unable to get into the meeting. I just wanted to make sure that he had access.
Okay. The clerk is working on that. Yeah. Thank you. All right. Order. It is a member's privilege to join us either in person or remotely. Mr. Nader, you are aware of that. I appreciate that, Ms. Khalid. If it is going to be an issue that we can't resolve, I would ask the Liberal whip to just make preparations to replace Mr. Erskine Smith. Ms. Hogan, you have the floor for up to 5 minutes if you'd like.
Mr. Chair, I am pleased to be here today to talk about our report on the Canada Emergency Business Account Program, which was tabled in the House of Commons on December 2nd. As you've mentioned, I'm accompanied by Andrew Hayes, Deputy Auditor General, and Melanie Cabana, who's the Senior Principal that was responsible for the audit. Puisque j'ai donné un aperçu de mon rapport lorsque j'ai comparu devant ce...
As I stated when I appeared before this committee last week, actually, as I gave opening remarks last week, I won't this week, but I will be happy to answer any of the members' questions. Mr. Forbes, if you have any comments. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm here with my colleague, Mr. Brazeau, and thank you to the committee for the invitation to come speak with you regarding the audit of the Canada Emergency Business Account Program. I would like to thank the Auditor General and her team for her work on this file. They worked closely with our team as they put the audit together. Before talking about the specific recommendations, I first want to talk about the context in which this unprecedented program was put in place. We know that the repercussions that on the Canadian economy are not detailed in the Auditor General's report. the program contributed significantly to ensuring the resilience of the Canadian economy during and after the pandemic. In the spring of 2020, the government quickly stood up this program, whose goal was to ensure that Canadian small and medium-sized businesses could survive the pandemic. No government department was positioned to deliver a program of this size and scale. EDC was selected given its expertise in loan delivery and administration, as well as the possibility to use the Canada account to fund CEBA transactions. At launch, the economic situation was highly uncertain. As more became known, and in response to the evolving needs of businesses during this time, CEBA was rapidly expanded and fine-tuned over the course of 2020.
For instance, after stakeholders such as Indigenous groups flagged that not all businesses use business accounts, the requirement for a business account was removed. After agriculture groups, among others, flagged that some businesses did not have significant payroll expenses, but did have other non-deferrable expenses, the non-deferrable expense stream was created. And after groups such as the Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses highlighted the need for additional support, the amount of CEBA loans available expanded from $40,000 to $60,000. An important point is the timeliness of the support delivered under the CEBA program. Business insolvencies, particularly for small business, were dramatically reduced during the pandemic, a reduction of nearly 25% in 2020 and a further 11% in 2021. Over 55% of CEBA loan holders reported that the amount received from CEBA was necessary to maintain their operations during the pandemic. It's also positive that over 80% of loan holders fully repaid their loan by March 2024 and received partial loan forgiveness. Repayments have continued, and the current outstanding balance has dropped from $8.5 billion at the end of March to just over $8 billion at the end of November, even though we still have another 2 years to the final repayment deadline. In the report, the Office of the Auditor General provided Finance Canada with 4 recommendations. 3 of them deal with improving collection efforts from both eligible and ineligible recipients, and I would note that we strongly support those recommendations and increasing our efforts or ensuring we make good efforts to collect on owed funds, including from ineligible loan holders. We did, however, disagree with one of the recommendations, which was that Finance Canada address the accountability and oversight gaps of the CEBA program, including oversight of administrative expenses. I would note we had multiple exchanges with the Auditor General in her office over the course of the audit on this very point, as we wished to support their work, and I think we came to some agreement on some of the root causes, but we couldn't find agreement on the recommendation itself. The Auditor General's report did raise important questions about the current oversight and accountability mechanisms around the Canada account and whether they are well suited for the management of a large government program such as the CEBA program. We do agree also that there are likely opportunities to improve the oversight of programs like CEBA. That being said, we had to disagree with the recommendation that we should address the accountability and oversight gaps for the CEBA program, including the oversight of administrative expenditures that are paid. We have EDC as the program administrator that was responsible for its decisions regarding administrative expenditures, and Finance Canada doesn't have the legislative authority to evaluate or provide direction on these expenditures, and as such can't agree to the recommendation. Again, I want to reiterate that the program was delivered in unusual circumstances. We think it did a great job in supporting small and medium-sized businesses throughout the pandemic, and we're happy to take any questions from the committee on the audit or the program.
Thank you very much. I'll begin now our first round. First round consists of 4 members, 6 minutes each. Mr. McCauley, you have the floor, please.
Thanks, Chair. Witnesses, thanks for being with us today. Welcome back, A.G. Hogan, Mr. Hayes, and Ms. Cabana. Quick question to you, A.G. Hogan. I'm looking at a press release released by Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland, of course, the Minister of Finance, and the Minister for Small Businesses, Minister Valdez, and I quote that your report doesn't properly acknowledge that CEBA was designed and delivered during a global pandemic. Now, I recall a previous report about COVID benefits, about the lackluster oversight on it. Do you think a pandemic is an excuse not to provide proper oversight or proper guardrails around the spending of taxpayers' dollars, as the government's insisting here?
So I've been asked this question a few times since we released the report, and I very much stand by the fact that I believe our report is quite balanced. It does definitely talk about the pandemic. It recognizes the situation in which the program was rolled out. It acknowledges the rigorous analysis that the Department of Finance did to develop the policy and make recommendations around the report. I have said it about other programs, and I say it again, that even if there is a pandemic, there was an expected level of due diligence and monitoring of expenses, I think, that everyone would expect. I acknowledge that at the beginning. Going non-competitive and doing things quickly, the objective was to quickly get funds out, and that was achieved. But as the program kept moving on, there was the need to change that. And I've held that view for every single COVID program that we have looked at.
Thank you. Mr. Forbes, you kind of intimated the same argument that the finance minister stated, that while it was COVID, it had to be pushed out the door quickly. It was, et cetera, et cetera. Like, what is the acceptable level of fraud to be committed against a taxpayer by the government if we're stating, yeah, a lot of dollars went out the door because it was COVID, but we had to do it fast, and look how many businesses we saved? There seems to be this attitude of theft is okay, fraud is okay, because, well, it was an emergency, and look how much money we got out the door anyways.
Thank you for the question. I don't think we think any level of fraud or theft is acceptable. I think the point we're making...
And I would agree, but then why do we have your department putting out a press release saying the AG didn't appreciate at the time the difficulties?
I think
and we seem to be all the pushback we get from the government is, well, unprecedented times. We had to put the money out the door as soon as possible. Look how successful, and you yourself stated how successful the program was. But we have all this money stolen from taxpayers. We have money being sole sourced, possibly in a fraudulent way through Accenture. But it just seems to be, well, it's acceptable because it was an emergency.
Thank you for the question. I disagree with the idea that that we treat fraud or not collecting amounts owed as things that we can just wave away. And indeed, as I said, the Auditor General made a number of recommendations around improving efforts to collect from ineligible or other accounts that were outstanding. We agree that we have to do, these are taxpayer dollars, as you said, and these are amounts that we intend to go after.
The December 2nd statement?
I've read it. I don't have it in front of me right now.
There's not one, there's 8 paragraphs, there's not one word about protecting taxpayers' money, preventing fraud, or even claiming it back. And I just find that very concerning that the government has time to attack the AG, has time to throw its arm out, patting themselves on the back, but there's not a single comment about the stolen money, the money fraudulently taken from taxpayers. I'm going to get a different line of thinking. Or question, please, who decided that EDC would be the department or the Crown Corp that was going to manage this program? Because we heard from EDC that they weren't prepared for it, they didn't have the capacity, and they pushed back against finance with this information. So who decided, yeah, we're going to give it to you anyways?
Well, the government took the decision to use EDC as a delivery vehicle.
The government, was that Minister of Finance level? Like, who?
Well,
someone would have had to, because it's as much as the government is a blob. Someone has to.
It's a cabinet decision to to the delivery agent. So
it would have come out of cabinet.
It's a cabinet decision as to who delivers. Right?
We heard the previous testimony on the CERB issue. We heard from CRA that CRA pushed back against some of the proposed ways the money was going to flow out for fear of fraud, oversight issues. Did finance push back against this decision to give it to EDC, which is clearly not capable of rolling out this program?
I think the challenge we faced, I mean, thank you for the question. The challenge that we faced was, given the scope and the scale of this program and the timing, there weren't a lot of options as to how to deliver this, and we knew we had to get the support out. EDC, it was determined, was the best option. I'm not saying it was easy for EDC or they were set up for
Determined by
it.
who? Was it like a group decision of we have no one else, or no, make it EDC?
So we would have assessed what the options were for delivery of such a program, and we would have assessed that, and we would have provided options, the risks and benefits of various delivery options, and the decision would have been made based on that.
Thanks,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Forbes.
Thank you very much. Next up is Mr. Erskine Smith joining us online. You have the floor.
Thanks very much, Chair. And by the way, I'm using a different system but I've just gone through doing a sound check with this, so I hope it's efficient for the interpreters. I was told it was better, so we'll see. I want to start with you, Mr. Forbes. There's been a lot of talk about the recovery of ineligible loans, and in fact, when the Auditor General attended previously, she expressed some displeasure.
Just 1 second, Mr. Erskine Smith. I'm looking for either a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Mr. Erskine Smith, I'm afraid I'm getting a thumbs down from the
after
interpreter.
all that,
I will
after
turn
all
to
that,
Mr.
okay.
Drouin then. Mr. Drouin, you have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I hope my time will be 6 minutes, or, yeah, okay, perfect. Yeah, exactly. Just one quick question. Obviously, I know you've acknowledged the auditor reports, and Mr. Forbes, good to see you in front of the PACP committee. Normally, I was used to seeing you in front of the Ag committee. We still miss you over there. You were a good deputy minister, but great to see you that you're in finance. Just remember to say yes to all the Ag requests, if I can make one plea. The report 8, so the CEBA account, we were obviously the Auditor General has made a statement with regards to the administrative costs with EDC, and there should be more accountability, and either finance should have taken that. Finance has said they've disagreed with that. Can you explain to this committee as to why?
Thanks for the question. I mean, I think 2 points. One, as I said, I feel that in discussions with the Auditor General's team and in the report, we did recognize that in this scale and scope, we need to think about oversight of, if we were to deliver a program of this scale via EDC and the Canada account again, we would have to think about, are there better oversight mechanisms for administrative expenses? Our issue at the Department of Finance is that we don't really have, once a program is launched, the legislative or administrative tools to play that role ourselves. So I'm not opposed to oversight, to be clear. I think it was just that we ourselves were put in the recommendation as the organization to do that, and we felt that that would be better, something that should be thought about, but not necessarily
At the time, the government would have had to propose a legislative change in order for that to respect the recommendation of the Auditor General. We would have had to change the law, is essentially what you're...
Well, we'd have to have changed either I'd have to think about whether it be a legislative change, but I would have had to effectively insert myself in administrative decisions that were being made by EDC over the course of administration of the program. Now, I do want to say that we were engaged with EDC as the program rolled out, so we were aware of the expenses that were going on, and in the end feel, quite honestly, that the administrative expenses, the level of those expenses is actually, quite reasonable. It's certainly we think under 1% per year for delivering loans of that value, which is actually quite reasonable in the context of the cost of other programs.
Mm-hmm. No, and we've definitely had some previous meetings with regards to other matters that the Auditor General has brought forward. On this note, Mr. Chair, I know you've the subcommittee had met before, but I would move that we resume debate on Ms. Khalid's motion.
Just 1 second. I'm going to have the clerk just send that out so everyone has it. I'm going to get the witnesses just to hold for a few minutes. And we have to do the vote as well. So, well, would members like to see, I guess it doesn't really matter, does it? Well, yeah, actually it could. Would you send the motion out to all members so members know what we're voting on to resume or not? Thank you. I'm just going to suspend until that is sent out. It'll be a minute or two. All right, the motion has been sent around. Mr. Cannings, do you have I have an obligation to go directly to a vote unless you have is this a point of order or are you just in the lineup to speak?
No, sorry, this was to get in the lineup.
That's fine. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much. And no, I will take note of that. You're not the first, and I will first turn to the clerk to take a roll call.
Ms. Bradford.
Yes.
Monsieur Drouin.
En faveur.
Mr. Erskine-Smith.
Yes.
Ms. Khalid.
Yes.
Ms. Yip.
Yes.
Mr. McCauley.
No.
Mr. Nader.
No.
Mr. Stewart.
No.
Madame Sinclair de Gagné.
Ça marche.
No.
Mr. Cannings.
Yes.
6 yeas, 4 nays.
All right. If I could just ask the witnesses, I suspect you'll be excused momentarily here, but I'm just going to take the temperature of the room first. I already have a speaking list. We're resuming the debate on the motion which you've all been sent to. Mr. Nader, you have the floor, please.
There is an amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, it's on my amendment.
And pardon me, we're actually resuming debate on the amendment to the motion. So just so we're clear, you have the floor, Mr. Nader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And you know, it's quite frankly galling. I mean, I guess the Liberals don't want to listen, but that's all fine. I'll wait for Ms. Bradford and Ms. Yip to complete their private conversations, getting their directions from staff.
Just let me ask you, Ms. Clay, did you motion to speak? I saw your hand move quickly. No, okay, that's fine. I just didn't want to overlook you. So, Mr. Nader, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. You know, frankly, it's here we are. We've had 2 questions. 2 rounds of questions. Our friends from the NDP and Bloc have yet to have a chance to ask these officials any questions, and here we are, the Liberals coming in with a guillotine motion to prevent the committee from doing its work. I will say, as a matter in passing, I do want to thank our witnesses for joining us, even though they may not get their full opportunity to ask questions. And I want to note, I appreciate Finance Canada coming in person. I think that's a show of respect for this committee, and I appreciate the in-person attendance, which we did not have with Export Development Canada, which I think is quite unfortunate considering they're 450 meters from this building. So I do appreciate in-person attendance. I think it's a mark of respect, so I do thank you for that. But here we are. I mean, we've had a subcommittee meeting on this, a subcommittee meeting where Liberal members were present, where we agreed that CEBA would be a priority for this committee. There's a Liberal member on that committee.
Mr. Chair,
Pardon me, Mr. Khalid?
I'd like point of order.
Yes.
I do believe that discussions that happened within the subcommittee were in camera, and the members should not be speaking about them out of camera, especially since we haven't passed any report that came out of that subcommittee.
All right. The subcommittee had a report. I want to check with the clerk to find out it was certainly sent to members. But Mr. Nader, I would ask you just to kind of respect the in-camera.
Absolutely, but I will say there was a subcommittee report, and Liberal members are on that subcommittee. And so if if they want to have these discussions, well, let's go back to the subcommittee report and discuss it that way. But here's the thing: this is a priority of this committee, the CEBA study, and what we've had today after 2 rounds of questions, or not even 2 rounds, 2 sets of questions, a guillotine motion to go through this. And I just want to highlight a couple of the points from this motion, which I think are just ridiculous.
Point of order again, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Ms.
I
Khalid.
believe that the debate is on the amendment, and I don't actually remember what the amendment is, so perhaps Mr. Nader can start there.
I would be happy to focus.
Why don't you start there, Mr. Nader?
Sure.
Okay, I can. I'm going to excuse the witnesses. Thank you very much for coming in. We will see you likely in the new year. I've got a long list here, and let the festivities begin, Mr. Nader. If you could refresh everyone's memory on where we're at with the amendment to the motion.
Thank you, Chair. Just to go back, obviously, perhaps I'll wait a minute, Chair, while the commotion dies down. I notice there are now no Liberals at the table.
That's
I don't
all
know
right.
if that means if we're
I'll just suspend for a second. Just reminding the room, the amendment to the motion. Point of order, yes. Mr. Dewey.
Mr. Chair, I'd like your ruling because I think the amendment is no longer receivable. As I hope that Mr. Nader doesn't have the power to go back in time, but December 5th has come and gone, and it's irrelevant now. So I'd ask your ruling on that and check to see if it's still in order.
Just consult the clerk, and I suppose Mr. Nader can get ready to prepare a new date. 1 second, please. Yes, just to, I mean, Mr. Dwayne, it was set in time. We've moved beyond that time, but it hasn't changed the objective of Mr. Nader's amendment. So,
but if we adopt the sub-amendment, Mr. Chair, we can't act on the amendment itself because it says December 5th. It has gone and passed.
any further meetings take place after December 5th, so that could be tomorrow, the next day. It doesn't say on, it says after. So,
challenge the chair.
okay. If the clerk could call the vote, this is unusual because normally challenges to an amendment don't happen when we're midstream, but on a technicality, I will allow it. This is challenging the amendment that Mr. Nader's amendment is out of order. Of course, he will just propose another amendment, I'm sure, but let's have the roll call, please.
Shall the decision of the chair be sustained?
No.
Ms. Bradford? Monsieur Drouin?
No.
Mr. Erskine-Smith?
No.
Madame Khalid?
No.
Ms. Yip?
No.
Mr. McCauley?
Sustain the chair.
Mr. Nader?
Sustain the chair.
Mr. Stewart?
Sustain the chair.
Madame Saint-Clair de Gagny?
No.
Mr. Cannings?
Yes.
Four yeas, 6 nays.
The amendment is defeated. Mr. Nader, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Chair. Rather disappointing. I thought that was a rather reasonable amendment. Not a reasoned amendment, but a reasonable amendment. But that's fine. I'm not too worked up over it. The day is long, and there's much that can be said on this original motion, which now frees me up to speak to the entirety of this Liberal guillotine motion. And let me highlight a few points about this motion. And there's a real effort here to prevent this committee from doing its work. Oh, so I did hear a heckle from my colleague here about what a guillotine motion actually is. I think that we don't use the term guillotine motion far enough in the Canadian Parliament, far more common in the UK. But a guillotine motion is basically any motion that ends debate, prevents Parliament or its committees from doing its work. Robespierre, but it prevents committees from doing its work. We see that all the time in the House of Commons with closure motions or time allocation motions. And this is effectively what this is. It is a guillotine motion on steroids because it not only guillotines one particular study, it guillotines multiple studies and prevents us from doing our work. Mr. Stewart wishes to have a historical definition of guillotine, but we shall go back to the French Revolution for that, and maybe on another time, in another place, we can have a more enlightened discussion on that. But to the motion at hand, I want to point out a few key challenges with this motion. First of all, Section 3. At the conclusion of the meeting on Report 1, ArriveCan, no more meetings be conducted to hear from witnesses in relation to Report 1, ArriveCan. No more meetings. We're done. We're finished. Wipe our hands of it. Even if something else comes out in the media, even if there's some new issues, new things to decide, no, we are preventing ourselves from having any more meetings on ArriveCan, period, full stop. It's not simple as something we could potentially be agreeable that, after that meeting we give drafting instructions. I think we could probably live with that, but no, it's a matter of no meetings to hear from witnesses.
Mr. Nair, I actually, you raised a good point. I just want to get clarification from that on the motion sponsor. Point 9, is that in fact your intent that even a 1064 would not trigger a meeting?
So, Chair, as I had said in our last meeting, as I was debating this motion, speaking to it, that absolutely 1064 is a right of the committee, and this motion does not take away that right to call that 1064.
So that's a problem you're going to have to address, Ms. Khalid, because, in fact, it does just that. Notwithstanding a meeting called pursuant to Standing Order 1064, no meeting of the subcommittee or committee, or no meeting of the committee or subcommittee be held during Parliament's adjournment from December 18 to 26. So, in fact, the way this is written, 1064 would not be permitted. Mr. Nader, you have the floor again.
Thank you, Chair, and I thank you for your learned comment on that, because I think that is a good point. It's and I think you obviously have the experience as a skilled parliamentarian, so I do appreciate your wise counsel on this matter. But it goes back to the point of this motion is going to prevent this committee from doing work. And that's the reality. This is preventing us. So go back to the specific points in this meeting. So the first one is no more meetings on ArriveCan. We'll have one more meeting, and you'll note that in this actual motion, it doesn't actually say which witnesses we'll hear from that meeting. I think we have a pretty good indication of who we'll hear. First of all, I think we should be hearing from the CBSA president, Erin O'Gorman, who strikes me as the old Saturday Night Live sketch where O.J. Simpson is trying to find the real killer on the golf course. Ms. O'Gorman comes before this committee and claims that she has no clue whatsoever how ArriveCan went down. No clue, no idea. Just can't figure it out. Can't figure it out. Yeah, doesn't know what happened, who did what. Min Doan's emails disappearing. She even pushed back against that. Well, we don't know all the information of that, how that might have happened. Min Doan, who is the Chief Technology Officer of Canada, couldn't replace a battery on his laptop without conveniently losing all of his emails during his time as the ArriveCan scandal. But no, Ms. O'Gorman can't figure out who actually gave the order to deliver this contract through GC Strategies, and two guys working out of their basement, who I might add were required to appear before the bar of the House, something that has not happened very often in our history. And the previous time was actually another Liberal scandal, but on the Winnipeg Lab scandal, where the president of the was required to appear at the bar and be admonished by the Speaker of the House of Commons. And interesting, in that case, the Liberal government actually took the Speaker, who's elected as a Liberal, to court over that matter. But no, here we are. We are at a motion where no more meetings on ArriveCan, regardless of what may happen. We're just going to carte blanche, prevent us from going further. So that's point 3. I have a real issue with that. The guillotine of no more meetings. But the next one, it's interesting because obviously when the Liberals were drafting this, they weren't entirely paying attention to witnesses we've heard from, witnesses we haven't heard from, but the 2 more meetings be dedicated to Sustainable Development Technology Canada to hear from 3 witnesses, Zoe Colebook, again, we're happy to that. Andrew Noseworthy, happy to hear from him. And the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry. I would note, though, that offer to hear from Minister Champagne has been on the table for several months. And we have 5 Liberal MPs on this committee who sit in caucus with the minister. Surely one of them at some point could have pulled him aside and said, Minister, this committee really desires to hear from you on this important matter. Could you find it in your schedule to come to the committee? Especially since the original mandate letters to each of the ministers in this Liberal government with that they ought to make themselves available to committees and not just as a one-off, as a regular course of practice, so they can appear before the committee and be held accountable for the actions of their departments and agencies. But what's interesting about this point number 4 here is who the Liberals have left off of this list. First of all, Mr. McConaughey, who was deputy minister during a period of the scandal, is left off.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clarify that I had tried to seek unanimous consent to include Mr. McConaughey, and my
Thank
dear
you, Ms.
colleague
Kelly.
had
Ms. Kelly,
decided not to.
this is not
allow the
a point of
amendment.
order. If you'd like to be added to the speaking list, just put your hand up. Mr. Nader, what is truth? That is a question of the ages, and I'm sure it's one that Parliament will not settle. Mr. Nader, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Chair. And that does give me an opening to further along this line. You know, they did try to, I don't know if it was a mistake or they didn't realize it to change it last minute, but they actually wanted to take out another witness. They wanted to take out Andrew Noseworthy, which is why obviously we denied that, because there's a lot more we have to ask from Mr. Noseworthy. Obviously, just to remind our Liberal friends across the way, Mr. Noseworthy sat in those board meetings. He sat in those board meetings. I don't know if he was eating chicken fingers at the time and wasn't paying attention, but there he was in those meetings, not paying attention. Not paying attention when all of these conflicts of interest were going down, when Liberal appointees were enriching their friends, enriching themselves in some cases, voting on matters that would have they themselves benefited from. It was quite shocking. And Mr. Noseworthy was there as the assistant deputy minister at that meeting. We've heard a lot of interpretations of his role there, but I think the most important was from that of the deputy minister himself, who said that he was his, quote, eyes and ears on the SDTC board, the eyes and ears. But obviously, he had neither eyes to see nor tongue to speak because he did not report, or we don't know, but it appears that he didn't report these matters back. As one would have thought he ought to have been as the eyes and ears, you would have thought that there would have been reporting structures, which is why I'm not entirely sold on what his testimony was, or what, frankly, the testimony of others related to this matter were, that you would have a senior official, number 2 only to the deputy minister, him or herself, sitting in these SDTC meetings. And it was interesting when we heard from Ms. Verschaeren, who was chair of the board. One of the comments she made when I questioned her about the role of Mr. Noseworthy was actually that he was to bring the viewpoints from the department, which I think was quite interesting, quite fascinating, that the department was actually using this opportunity of Mr. Noseworthy on the committee to bring the point of view of ISID, of the deputy minister, and potentially the minister. Of course, that would have been Liberal Minister Navdeep Bains at the time. But I found that interesting. So point number 4 of this is that they would hear from Andrew Noseworthy, which we agree with. Obviously, we think it should be amended to include Mr. McConaughey, who was here for a meeting, was unable to testify at that point. But there is an important person, I would say, who isn't there, and it's another minister of the Crown, the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, the Honourable Stephen Guilbeault. Now, why would Minister Guilbeault be pertinent to this testimony? Well, my friend Mr. Stewart has many commentary, and perhaps he'll get his name on the list to provide his commentary on the record. Mr. Guilbeault was a lobbyist and a shareholder in an entity called Cycle Capital. So why is that important? Well, Cycle Capital was getting funded by SDTC. And while SDTC was making these funding decisions, guess who was lobbying the government of Canada? Stephen Guilbeault. So not only was he actively lobbying the government, the Liberal government, to whom he would later run as a Liberal candidate, he was a shareholder and to this day still discloses this matter on his ethics declaration about his financial interests in a company that was being funded, a conflicted board funding for SDTC. So obviously, we as the official opposition demand that Mr. Guilbeault appear before this committee. It was agreed by this committee that he be on the witness list. He has failed to appear, failed to grace us with his presence. I'll be honest, I always prefer witnesses to attend in person. That's why I thanked our friends from Finance Canada for appearing in person. I think that's a show of respect. But you know what? If Mr. Guilbeault actually wanted to appear virtually, I would take it. If he's willing to appear virtually, I would accept that. I mean, I wouldn't even force it be done in person. But he would appear in by Zoom to a meeting of the Public Accounts Committee. I'd take it. I think that would be a fair compromise. We do have a couple meetings left. I know they're currently designated to witness reports, but if we could find an extra time here or there, I think it'd be super that he be able to appear, because we cannot complete our study of SDTC without hearing from both those ministers, and perhaps my friends across the way could take that message back to caucus this week, to the Liberal caucus, and encourage Mr. Guilbeault to respect the accountability of this committee, the Public Accounts Committee. We don't have a moniker like the Mighty Ogo, but the Public Accounts Committee is nonetheless one of the important committees of this place. But Section 4 then flows into Section 5 of this motion, and it says this: at the conclusion of the second meeting on Report 6, Sustainable Development Technology Canada, no more meetings be conducted to hear from witnesses in relation to Report 6, Sustainable Development Technology Canada. So what I find interesting here, Mr. Chair, is that they want to guillotine this study before the House of Commons has even pronounced on the question of privilege related to the disclosure of documents to the law clerk in an unredacted form. So it really begs the question of what could be coming down the pipe, what the Liberals are so scared of, so afraid of what could be determined in SDTC and the scandals that are behind these unredacted documents. They would rather allow the House of Commons to be paralyzed since September of this year than simply hand over the documents in the proper format that was ordered by the House of Commons to the law clerk, so that those matters could be referred to the RCMP, and the RCMP can do with them what they wish. The RCMP can look at them, they can not look at them, they can put them in the shredder, they can lay criminal charges, they can do whatever they wish, because the RCMP has that discretion, that authority, and that independence. But no, rather than simply doing what is required of them by the House of Commons, they have decided to paralyze the House for now over 2 months. And it's interesting because we had finance here, and if we had had the chance to question them rather than this Liberal guillotine motion, I would have had some questions for them as well about the status of their enterprises, specifically related to the fall economic statement, which we have not yet been given indication, despite, I would note, the willingness of our official opposition and our leader to provide time this very afternoon to deliver said statement. It was not accepted. Even on opposition day, we were willing to allow the Liberals to stand in the House of Commons so the Minister of Finance can tell us and tell Canadians just how bad the deficit numbers really are. We are obviously seeing news reports about them having blown through their deficit projections, blown through whatever fiscal guardrails may or may not have been left at this point. And obviously, I think with this particular Liberal government, this particular Liberal finance minister, those guardrails have long gone. But no, the Liberals aren't even taking us up on a fair option to actually come before the House and do that, all because they are bound and determined to prevent the lawful order of the House of Commons from being filled out and fulfilled related to Sustainable Development Technology Canada. This is an enterprise that simply didn't have any care whatsoever for proper governance and for management of taxpayers' dollars. It's really unfortunate, and it saddens me that we would have a enterprise of government that would just not have that respect. But not for the Liberals. No, they're happy with just shutting this down and hearing from no more witnesses on SDTC, regardless of what may or may not come out of things. But then that brings me to point 8 of this motion, unamended motion at this point, since the Liberals threw out my thoughtful amendment. But it says that the chair schedule at least 2 meetings for the consideration of draft reports. Well, I often hear from Liberal colleagues about how important it is to get draft reports done. But yet, when the chair here offers to have notice of meeting has already gone out for this coming Wednesday for a full 2 hours of draft reports. Again, next week for another 2 hours of draft report. The Liberals, I guess, can't take yes for an answer and instead have come forward with this motion, which then, of course, leads us to point 9 in the final clause of this amendment. And it reads, notwithstanding a meeting called pursuant to Standing Order 1064, no meetings of the committee or subcommittee be held during Parliament's adjournment from December 18th, 2024 to January 26th, 2025. So about 6 weeks, give or take, that this committee will be on ice and unable to operate, unable to fulfill our mandate is entrusted to us by the standing orders, but also by Canadians, that we will effectively handcuff ourselves, preventing us from meeting, preventing us from undertaking studies, undertaking anything, whether it's an emergency situation or not. And I do think, Mr. Chair, as you rightly pointed out, it does actually put us in a bit of a sticky situation if a 1064 is requested, whether that could actually be fulfilled, or if the 1064 meeting does happen, whether any outcome of that meeting could be
Mr. Chair?
fulfilled.
Mr. Nair, point of order. Yes, Mr. Durang.
I just want to inform my colleague that the fall economic statement will be on December 16th. I'm sure he'll be happy.
Thank you very much for that update. Not a point of order, Mr. Nader. You have
on the same point of order.
Yes, Mr. Genuine.
If Mr. Durang could just clarify if he thinks we'll be happy about the date, or we'll be happy once we see the economic statement.
Mr.
I
Genuine,
suspect Canadians will not be happy.
Ms. Genuine, you've already indicated your desire to speak, so we'll come back to you. Mr. Nader, you have the floor. And there is a long list of individuals to speak, so Mr. Nader, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Chair. I'm sure there are many folks who want to speak to this. I do thank Mr. Drouin for making that note that December 16th will finally. I am happy to have the information. I am not so sure I'll be as pleased with the actual information that will come out of the fall economic statement, which will effectively see how it's expensive. When we finally see what has been transpiring under this Liberal government, blowing through their deficits. But back to the matter at hand. We are here debating a motion that will absolutely prevent us from doing any work. And I did joke that this was the Liberal holiday from accountability, that they want to be able to pause their accountability, pause their ability to be held accountable for the failures of this government, of this Liberal government. And I find it interesting as well, if we want to go back to the very first point about the CEBA. We'll recall what was happening when this CEBA program was being dreamed up. I will point out first, I do find it very troubling that the Department of Finance failed to accept responsibility, that the Minister of Finance tried to blame the pandemic and it was all the pandemic fault. The pandemic made me do it. But the Auditor General was very, very clear that the pandemic does not excuse one from their accountability. It doesn't excuse one from the importance of following sound rules. And as the Auditor General mentioned today, and again last week with the EDC officials, that there were points along the line where even if at the very beginning there was a more urgent situation to make things happen, to change things around, those things could have been corrected and added guardrails and procedures put in place as they went along that could have prevented that. But it made me think, well, why wasn't finance focused on those issues at the time? What the heck was going on at the Department of Finance at that time? We don't know, as my colleague, Mr. McCauley, says. But I think we may actually know because it was the We Charity scandal. So perhaps the Minister of Finance at the time was far too concerned about getting nearly $1 billion, $900+ million to his friends at the We Charity scandal, to give them hundreds of millions of dollars, that finance was more preoccupied with that, enriching friends of the Liberal Party. And it may shock Canadians. They may have forgotten this or blocked it from their minds, but actually members of the Prime Minister's family were actually being paid by the We organization to give speeches. They were paying members of the Prime Minister's own family to give speeches, and then lo and behold, they get a nearly $1 billion contract from the government to encourage Canadians to volunteer. I always find it interesting. It costs $1 billion for folks to volunteer. I know we all have great organizations in our riding who volunteer each and every day without $1 billion from His Majesty's government. But obviously that's the Liberal way. But to the point at hand, while the Department of Finance should have been focused on putting proper guardrails, proper guidelines for this program, they were dealing with the massive fallout from the We Charity scandal. Because while I noted that the Prime Minister's family members, immediate family members, were being paid by the We organization, what came out as well, and this came out in an ethics report, a damning ethics report, I might add, from the ethics commissioner, that found Bill Morneau, the Minister of Finance at the time, to have broken the ethics law, because he himself also had a close family member who was employed by the We organization. And you might add as well that Bill Morneau actually plumb forgot. He just plumb forgot, but I believe it was a $40,000 trip that he took courtesy of the We organization. $40,000 trip, and he just plumb forgot. I mean, I guess Minister Morneau also is the one who plumb forgot about that French villa that he owned. I sometimes forget where I put my car keys, but I can't imagine forgetting a French villa. But
point of order: were they French car keys or?
I drive a little Hyundai, so. But this was what was going on at the time. This was what was going on at the time of the of when the department should have been focused on CEBA, on making sure there were proper accountability measures in place, that we weren't seeing these sole source contracts to Accenture for hundreds of millions of dollars to an organization, an entity that did not do loans. That's what we heard last week from EDC. EDC doesn't do loans. They did about 300 loans internationally, but they are focused on export development. They are not a lending institution. And it's interesting as well to go a step further on the CEBA side of things. The actual loans were delivered by the financial institutions, by the banks, by credit unions, by these entities, and so the money was going to Accenture for actually not actually delivering the loans, which makes it even more appalling that this was allowed to happen and be undertaken. And obviously, the Auditor General's report clarified that pretty clearly. But I would just make a few more points, just wrap up this particular thought on Bill Morneau. But this was obviously something that was taking up a lot of time at the Department of Finance and with the Finance Minister himself. Because what happened? The Minister had to resign. The Minister of Finance was forced out of his job because of the We Charity scandal, the We Organization scandal, and because of the damning ethics report on this matter. Because as the ethics commissioner clearly determined, he participated in the discussions on this matter when he had a clear connection to a pecuniary interest, a clear connection to a close family member who was involved with this organization. And the way that all went down, I think, is absolutely appalling. That Liberals at the time were more concerned with getting money, nearly $1 billion, to their friends at the We Organization rather than focusing on the administration of this loan program. What is interesting, and I know the Liberals are laughing, I guess they don't find fraud that interesting, or they find it a laughing matter, but the fact is that there was at least 17 cases of fraud. Oh, Chair, I think the translation may not be working. The Liberals don't seem to be hearing what I say.
I think the translation is working just fine.
Okay,
Yes,
good.
it is, Mr.
I
Nader.
guess they're just not paying attention.
Mr. Chair,
then.
I just find that the opposition thinks we're listening to them.
Thank you.
I acknowledge the man. I respect him, but I was not talking about him.
As is common for the Liberal backbench, there is no need to listen to what's going on the front row. Mr. Nader, you
Thank
have the
you,
floor.
Chair. The Liberals are absolutely.
Spicy.
I'm not sure that's appropriate. That type of commentary.
We don't use the word debate.
But I digress. Back to the point at hand, though. The French. Now, well,
Which one?
it was the guillotine.
I'll go there.
Back, I'll allow that to Mr. Stewart. My interest is on guillotine motions rather than guillotine as the focus of the French Revolution and their accountability mechanisms, which were far more decapitating at the time. But I want to just go back to the point here, is that the Liberals were more concerned at the time about getting money to their well-connected friends rather than administering this program. And they made the decision to give it to EDC, which had no ability, no expertise to do that. And I had a question I wanted to follow up with finance, because they said that they looked at the options, and they said there were not a lot of options other than giving it to EDC. But the fact remains, well, there were a lot of options that could have been done, because EDC contracted out with sole source contract to Accenture, and then subcontracted that. Accenture did to one of their own subsidiaries. So it's just it begs the question of why they would have even gone to EDC when it was really, I guess, Accenture who could have done it with any entity that may have had more accountability, because as a Crown corporation, they were separate and apart from certain accountability measures that could have been undertaken. Now, BDC was a good example, as my colleague Mr. McCauley just highlighted. But I mean, these are just the issues at hand that really are troubling, and I think. The Auditor General was right and appropriate in undertaking this study. So I do know that my reasonable amendment earlier was ruled out of order. Since I do have the floor here, I would like to move a different amendment, if that would be okay, Mr. Chair.
Okay, yes, thank you. Just yes, Mr. Nader, you have the floor.
Thank you. So. Oh, okay, I didn't know.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I would move the following amendment. So first of all, that in Section 1, the numbers 27th be replaced with 6th. So it would then take place after January 6th, 2025.
Mr. Nader, that is just, sorry, to December 6th?
Sorry, January 6th.
Oh, January 6th,
Did I say
okay.
December?
Pardon me. You might not have. I just heard the date, but just was trying to preempt Mr. Durain's concern. So, okay, pardon me.
So the first thing it would be changed from January 27th, 2025 to after January 6th, 2025. So that would be part of the amendment. The second one would be under Section 3 of the current motion. So I would amend by removing the words after arrive can and inserting the following. The committee give drafting instructions to the analysts on Report 1 arrive can. So that full clause would now read, at the conclusion of the meeting on Report 1 arrive can, the committee give drafting instructions to the analysts on Report 1 arrive can. For section...
Go ahead, Mr. Nader, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Section 5, I would add that after the very end of that clause, we insert the following: provided all the aforementioned witnesses have appeared. So that would be at the end of clause 5, and that clause 9 be deleted. So that would be the amendment, and I think I still have the ability to speak briefly to this if that's...
You do. I'm going to ask you, have you sent that into the clerk?
If it hasn't been sent in, it's probably working its way through the interwebs right now, and hopefully will be with the clerk shortly.
Keep speaking to it until I check. Once the clerk's received it, I will then suspend to get it out. But until then, you have the floor. I don't want to create a precedent where I suspend while a motion is being drafted. So
I appreciate that.
You keep the floor. Speaking to your amendment, I'll check with the clerk.
I'm happy to keep the floor because I did hear I wouldn't say a heckle, but perhaps a question from Ms. Khalid about my one amendment being redundant because it falls under Section 8. But I would note that I believe this is actually her original motion. The consideration of draft reports is far different than drafting instructions. The consideration of the draft reports are reports that have already been drafted under the direction of our committee. And so this would be drafting instructions on the new reports that may or may not come out of this report. But let's go back to the amendment, which I believe I have the floor on. I think it's important that we remove Section 9, plain and simple. I think this is something that I think would be the antithesis of a democratic society where we would knowingly and freely condemn ourselves to being unable to respond to things that may or may not arise in the 6 weeks. Now, perhaps there may be things that Liberals know are coming down the pipe that would be unfriendly to their cause or to their narrative, or perhaps the fall economic statement that's coming on December 16th will be so bad that they don't want the opportunity to have to be anywhere near Ottawa to be held to account for their blown deficit projections. But my friend Mr. Drouin claims rightly that he's always near Ottawa, and he does have the wonderful benefit of being from a beautiful part of Eastern Ontario, where he is within.
Parts of Ontario.
I won't make a political comment on what color that riding may be in the future, but it is a nice part of the country, and a strong. I'm sorry, I was getting distracted by the important commentary going back and forth between our friends across the way, which I do appreciate the friendly commentary. But back to the point at hand, it's not appropriate for us to be shutting down this committee, to be giving the Liberals a holiday from accountability, which is exactly what this motion would be doing. And so that's why we have to remove that. We are open to some of this. Obviously we're being fair. That we'll have the remaining meetings. We'll send drafting instructions after that, but we shouldn't be handcuffing ourselves from our ability to do our jobs as Canadians sent us here. Now,
Mr. I'll just interrupt you. So the clerks received the amendment to the motion. We're working on it, and as per what we normally do, you'll have the floor when we come back. I'm going to suspend until everyone has the amendment so they can see it in both official languages. So I'll suspend for approximately 5 minutes until the clerk is done, of course. I'll bring this meeting back into order. Mr. Nader, the floor is yours just when I finish up here, but your amendment to the motion has been sent in and received by email. Over to you, please.
Thank you.
Sorry, pardon me. And just so I'm now working on a speaking list for the amendment to the motion. And I currently have Mr. Genuis, Madame Secretary, Pierre Pressa, Mr. Viz. If you'd like to speak to and Mr. McCall, if you'd like to speak to it, just put your hand up either virtually or in the room. Thank you, Mr. Nader. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll just wrap up very briefly. But I just want to, for the benefit of the tens of viewers who are tuning in, just indicate take us back to what happened here today. We had witnesses, including the Auditor General and the Department of Finance, here to testify on the damning Auditor General report about the CEBA business accounts. The fact that there were at least 17 instances of potential fraud that have been referred to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, that $3.5 billion of ineligible funding went out to those who were not eligible to receive the funding. And yet, instead of dealing with the witnesses have now been excused so the Liberals could introduce a motion to give themselves a holiday from accountability. So I think we've made a reasonable amendment here that I think is, again, eminently reasonable for members of this committee. So I will leave my comments there, and I know a few of my colleagues wish to offer their thoughts on it, but I will end my formal comments there, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Just to run through it, I have Mr. Genuis, Madame Secretary, Mr. Viz, Mr. McCall, and then after that, Mr. Canning. So, Mr. Genuis, you have the floor, please.
Very much, Chair. It's a real pleasure to be back at Public Accounts Committee and to follow my good friend, Mr. Nader. I do think he's put forward a reasonable amendment. To my taste, it might be almost too reasonable, but it certainly is a reasonable amendment. Colleagues, this is a frustrating situation to find ourselves in because the government's view seems to be that the only time they need to be doing any kind of parliamentary work is during the relatively limited periods when Parliament is sitting. And fundamentally, Conservatives, we don't agree with that. So I think members are, of course, familiar with the schedule, but for members of the public that are maybe less familiar with it, Parliament sits about half of the weeks of the year, and it sits Monday to Friday, but when it's in session, typically most members are here Monday to Thursday. Some remain on the Friday, the rest of the weeks of the year used to be informally known as break weeks, but of course politicians have wisely sought to brand those as something else. But they're not. In truth, they're not break weeks. They are constituency work weeks. Members do obviously undertake a lot of activities during those non-parliamentary weeks that do qualify substantively as work. Nonetheless, the business of the nation, that is the governance responsibilities of members of Parliament, can and should continue. Now, when I was first elected in 2015, and I just looking around this table, I think there's a lot of colleagues here that were elected at that time, or had, like you, Mr. Chair, had been elected previous to that time. You'll recall a time when Parliament sitting or committees meeting meant that the only way to participate in the activities of that session was to be physically present in Ottawa. That if you were in your own constituency for an event, or you were somewhere else in the country, you couldn't vote, you couldn't participate in debate, you couldn't participate in committee. That was the reality from the founding of this country up until the COVID pandemic. And that's when a kind of hybrid parliament structure was established. And we've had lots of debates about the pros and cons of different aspects of that, and you know, whether it makes sense. And there have been some modifications along the way. But whatever one thinks of the wisdom of those systems, it is a reality that those systems are in fact in place, which means that members of Parliament now who want to vote, participate in committee, even participate in the activities of the chamber, do not need to be physically present in Ottawa. They can get out of bed, fire up their computer, and sign on to House of Commons committee. They can vote through their app. So there's a great deal more flexibility for members of Parliament to engage in those ways. In fact, right now we have a number of members that are doing that very thing. I'm here in Ottawa, but I see that there are a number of members that are participating virtually, and that's something that the system allows them to do. So the point is that when committees meet now with this new technology that has existed post the COVID pandemic, during and post the COVID pandemic period, members can fully participate in the work of committees, and they can do so from anywhere in the country. The only exception to that is you, Mr. Chair, who the rules now require you to be present in person, but the rules also provide for the fact that the chair is the one who calls the meetings. So at least the chair has some flexibility in terms of when to call the meetings to ensure that she or he is able to be in Ottawa for the facilitation of those meetings. But other than the chair, you could have an entirely empty room. You'd have members all from their constituency. So if there is, say, a 2-hour meeting in the middle of a parliamentary break, it is no longer the case that means a lot of travel both ways for members of Parliament, especially for people like me who come from the West. It does. Some members will choose to do that, obviously, and I have often flown into Ottawa specifically, seeing there being some value in being in person for committee meetings. But the option exists, and therefore I don't think it should be that onerous to, from time to time, have committee meetings take place during parliamentary breaks, when basically, yes, it requires a person to find those 2 or 3 hours in their schedule for that meeting, and yes, of course, do the appropriate preparation time. But I'd imagine what people who were members of Parliament 20 years ago must think of this. That you've got really, frankly, Liberal members of Parliament have championed their own ease and comfort in their engagement with their parliamentary work.
Point of order, Mr.
Yeah,
Chair.
I have a point of order.
I just question the relevance of what Mr. Genuis has been talking about for the past, however long he's been talking about.
I have another comment, another point of order from Mr. Nader on the same issue.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's eminently related to the point at hand, because we're talking about when meetings can and ought to be held.
Thank you. No, I tend to agree that Mr. Garnett is addressing the when Parliament sits and how, which goes to the heart of this motion amendment. Mr. Jennings, you have the floor. And Mr. Canning, I do have you down on the list. You stepped away when I went to the roll call. You're about four away to speak on the amendment, but I do have you down, sir. Mr. Jennings, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking precisely to the way the parliamentary calendar unfolds and how that really should shed some light on point 9 in the original motion for Ms. Khalid that my colleague Mr. Nader is proposing to remove via his amendment. Okay, so we have this situation, and this is relatively novel in the history of our Parliament, where at times not that long ago, I've only been here for about 9 years, and when I was first elected, you would have the requirement to be in person for committees in the House. You would have a lot of work happening around the clock in this place, work that required you to be in person. And now with the hybrid Parliament provisions, it is much more flexible. And I think the reality is the Liberals have prioritized trying to make things easier for members of Parliament. I wish they'd put more of an emphasis on making life easier for Canadians instead of being so focused on trying to make life easy for themselves. And so we have this motion again before this committee that, on top of everything that is already in place, tries to make life even easier for them by saying that the committee would not be able to meet at all to do its work outside of Standing Order 1064, which I'll comment on. Although the language here is I don't think what the motion actually says with respect to 1064 is actually what it actually matches with Ms. Calley's explanation of it. But I'll talk about the issues around Standing Order 1064 in a few moments. But the provisions of point 9 in this motion say, notwithstanding a meeting called pursuant to Standing Order 1064, no meeting of the committee or subcommittee be held during Parliament's adjournment from December 18th, 2024 to January 26th, 2025. So this is during a 6-week break in the parliamentary calendar where yes, members will be engaging in their constituencies, but it's also a time when other kinds of parliamentary work can happen, including committee meetings. And so if a meeting is called for some time in January, yes, members will have to plan their schedules accordingly in the same way that they do, that they would during a sitting week, but they have a much easier time doing that now because we all are given the equipment. We can access it from our offices, even from our homes. You can sign into committee, and you participate in the work of that committee.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Just 1 second, Mr. Juniors, about point of order.
I respect the honourable member, but he's repeating himself. I've heard that before, less than 5 minutes ago.
All right, thank you. Mr. Juniors, yes, if you can try to avoid repetition. I didn't think you were being repetitive, but I'll just flag that as one of the guidelines for any kind of discussion. Mr. Juan, I respectfully would just say your colleague intervened on a point of order on relevance, which suggested maybe I needed to be more clear about the relationship. So I was trying to lay it out, but I do appreciate that you're paying more attention to my remarks than you were to Mr. Nader's. I think it would probably be more edifying if you listened more to him and less to me, honestly. But Mr. Nader and I were schoolmates together at Carleton University, and we're part of the Bachelor of Public Affairs and Policy Management caucus, and he always got better grades than I did, of course, as one might expect. Anyways, so the amendment which Mr. Nader in his great wisdom has proposed is to remove this section so that the committee can actually do its work over the break. And I want to make one other observation, Chair, on this, which is just the makeup of parliamentary committees. So there are, I can't remember the exact number, I'm sorry to say, but there are a large number of parliamentary committees, the vast majority of which are chaired by government members. The standing orders provide chairs of committees with significant powers. They have to act within the parameters of motions that are passed at committees, but they, within those parameters, schedule meetings, schedule witnesses. They do the logistical work around planning of the committee, of course, supported by the various committee staff. And they have, within the rules, they have a substantial amount of discretion in terms of how they schedule meetings. And that discretion is, in my experience, spending a lot of time on government-chaired committees, has, particularly under this government, that discretion has been shamelessly used in ways that align with the preferred patterns of activity that you'd expect from the government. In fact, we have a situation today at another committee where the House has ordered the committee to hear from 4 ministers, and those 4 ministers are all packed into the same meeting, which is actually I don't even think that's
that's an appropriate use of discretion. I think that goes beyond an appropriate use of discretion as per the House order. But the fundamental issue is that you have a government chair doing things that that no doubt reflect what the government wants. There are 4 committees that are opposition chaired, and these committees are particularly important because I think they're actually closer to what a parliamentary committee should be in the ideal, which is that they are not nearly as beholden in their activities to the directives of the executive. In practice, the government exercises significant control, effectively appointing the chairs of government-chaired committees. And they can, in practice, reassign those chairs, which is maybe raises some questions as well. So the chair in government-chaired committees, the chair, who's a member of the government caucus, has significant discretion, and that discretion is easily directed by the executive branch. But we have 4 committees that have a special particular role within our system because those 4 committees are chaired by members of the official opposition. So in those cases, the chairs are able to use their discretion in a way that lends itself more to facilitating holding the government to account. And in my experience, the official opposition chairs have actually been much more reasonable in being respectful of all committee members than have many government chairs. So the motion, and this is a motion that we would likely not see at a government-chaired committee, this is a motion that seeks to fetter the discretion of the chair. Chairs of committees are supposed to be able to say if there's some urgent issue, if there's some particular opportunity to hear from a witness, the chairs are able to grab those moments, and we see those happening on government-controlled committees, totally at the discretion of the chair, and it's notable that we see more of an effort, particularly here at Public Accounts, to constrain what is supposed to normally be the room of action for the chair. So those 4 committees are the Public Accounts Committee, the Government Operations Committee, the Ethics and Privacy Committee, and the Status of Women Committee. And those 4 committees uniquely are able to do work in a way that reflects having an opposition chair. And I think those that have kind of negotiated and worked out our standing orders to the point where they are have obviously recognized the importance of having opposition chaired committees and the role that they play. So I think it's inappropriate that we see these unique efforts by the government, a government member moving this motion, to try to, number one, do less work themselves, right, by limiting the ability of the committee to meet, and number 2, to impose these constraints on the work that an opposition chair is supposed to be able to do. I wanted to speak as well on the reference to the Standing Order 1064 in point 9 of Ms. Khalid's motion, and her explanation of the intention of the motion is to say that the provisions of 106.4, Standing Order 106.4 would still apply in the case even if this motion passed. So, I mean, maybe a better way of wording that this section would have been no meeting of the committee or subcommittee be held during Parliament's adjournment from December 18th to January 26th, 2025, comma, unless that meeting followed the issuance of a notice under Standing Order 106.4. I still wouldn't support it for the reasons that I've explained, but that would be, I think, if I can be helpful, that would maybe be a more effective way of wording the point that was intended to be communicated by this by this motion. But the way it's currently worded is to say, notwithstanding a meeting called pursuant to Standing Order 106-4, no meeting of the committee or subcommittee shall be held during Parliament's adjournment from December 18th, 2024 to January 26th, 2025. So I guess one sort of obvious piece is that parliamentary committees are kind of below the House of Commons as a whole. So if the House of Commons issues an order to committees, committee have to follow it. The House of Commons can agree to notwithstand a typical practice or rule of the House. A committee can decide to do something notwithstanding its own previous decisions, but committees can't order the House to do things, and committees cannot decide to do things notwithstanding the rules of the House. So if this committee were to pass a motion that said, notwithstanding 106-4, no meeting shall happen in this period, which isn't quite what the section says either, although it sort of sounds like it's saying that. That motion couldn't apply. So the committee cannot decide to not have Standing Order 106-4 apply because Standing Order 106-4 is a standing order of the House. It binds the committee because it comes from the House. In the same way that, again, if the committee received a House order to undertake a certain study or to call a certain person, the committee couldn't just decide to ignore the House because the committees are creatures of the House. Their power is derived from the House, and they have to respect the direction of the House. So, Standing Order 106-4 will apply regardless of what we say and regardless of what, even if this committee were unanimous in wanting something to occur. There are some procedural tools for a committee to ask the House to issue an order that would change their normal operating procedures, but that would require the House to take a decision. It would not be something that would just flow from an expressed wish of the committee. So for those who are unfamiliar, Standing Order 106-4 provides that a group of members, the standing order itself says 4 members, but we're operating under a House agreement that those members must be from at least 2 parties. So in practice, if you had 3 members of one party and 1 member of another signing a letter asking the committee to meet on a particular subject matter, then the chair would have to, within, I believe, 5 days, call a meeting for that purpose. So this has been one tool for getting committees to meet outside of regular parliamentary sitting times. And it's a tool that's I've seen frequently used on government-chaired committees. We used it from time to time when I was at the Foreign Affairs Committee, for example, when there was some breaking international situation that required our work, and government members, being how they are, didn't want to have to meet. We would have the opposition would come together and say we need to meet, and this would compel, even on a government-chaired committee, it would compel the committee to come together and hold that meeting. So that's how 106-4 works, and generally we have not seen 106-4 requests on opposition chaired committees, and it's kind of obvious why. On a government chaired committee, governments generally, this government in particular, wants committees to meet as little as possible because they don't like the scrutiny and the accountability associated with it. So it usually on government chaired committees takes a 106-4 to actually get the committee to come, even in the face of an urgent emergent situation. Whereas on opposition chaired committees, we have very diligent opposition chairs that are prepared to call those meetings in response to emerging situations, and it doesn't require the same kind of logistical work that usually is associated with putting together a 106-4. The chair can simply call the meeting. So I think it is worthwhile that chairs be able to use the power that they have within the rules. and call meetings, not just when someone's gone around and gathered signatures, but that meetings can be called efficiently, effectively, in response to emerging events. And look, that we can use the time, right? I mean, we have a 10-week break over the summer. We have a 6-week break over Christmas. Most Canadians would not expect that we are completely tools down for that period of time. Yes, we're going to spend time meeting with constituents and engaging with people in our ridings to hear what they're saying. But we can't be totally absent from the work of governance at the same time. Part of our job is to engage our constituents, and part of our job is to be part of the work of this deliberative assembly that we call Parliament and its committees. And I don't think Canadians would expect us to put that work on hold. So that's the point 9 on here. I did want to refer back to an earlier section that Mr. Nader had amended. So section 1 says, any further meetings on report 8, Canada Emergency Business Account, take place after January 27th, 2025. Mr. Nader, in his great wisdom, proposed an amendment, great wisdom and reasonableness, proposed an amendment that changes January 27th to January 6th, which takes us, as long as it wasn't scheduled on the 7th, would take us past the date when Christmas is celebrated in any of the various traditions according to the various calendars. And it would provide some degree of a buffer in between. But look, the purpose of this amendment is to underline that the work of the Canada, the review of the 8th report on the Canada Emergency Business Account is extremely important. We've seen how, I think in general, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic, the government was just very imprecise in the way they actually connected what they said their programs were supposed to do and connecting that with the eligibility of people who actually got the money. It's important that we insist on the idea of rule of law, that if there are eligibility criteria, that those eligibility criteria apply. And on multiple levels, this government has been very imprecise. They've seen billions of dollars spent in ways that may not align with eligibility. And then they've come back and tried to make the excuse that, well, there's a lot going on. It was a busy time, and it was a there were things we were trying to do and change quickly. I mean, of course, there was a lot going on. Of course, it was a busy time, but we're talking about real money that Canadians worked hard and paid to the government through their taxes. And we're also talking about money that's was borrowed that future generations will have to pay interest on and pay back. Through the period in which this Prime Minister has been in office, the last 9 years, the national debt has more than doubled. And I think a lot of that spending has demonstrated a kind of imprecision, a lack of focus and attention to what they have said the criteria of these programs are. So I do very strongly think that the work of this committee around the Canada Emergency Business Account is important. And look, the clock is ticking towards the end of this Parliament. I think, of course, our position is well known. We think Canada should have a carbon tax election as soon as possible, and we'll be voting non-confidence in the government later today, and I encourage my colleagues to join us in doing the same. And let's use the time we have left, whatever time we have left in this Parliament, to maximize the the value and the effectiveness of our work. And this is why we have put forward this amendment to the first section here. But with that in mind, Chair, I am actually going to propose a sub-amendment to clarify the timelines in the first section. Because I think we do need to clarify that that the work on the Canada Emergency Business Account is so important that it needs to be able to continue as soon as possible, and that it also needs to be able to continue after an election. I don't think we would want, for instance, an election to prevent us from being able to dig into these reports, although we certainly do want to have an election as soon as possible. So I'm proposing that at the end of the first bullet point, we add the words "or a carbon tax election, whichever comes first." So it would now read, any further meetings on Report 8, Canada Emergency Business Account, take place after January 6th, or a carbon tax election, whichever comes first. And so that's a sub-amendment. I don't have it in writing, but I think it's fairly clear. So shall I continue, Chair? Or?
Yeah, just one second. Hold on. I'm going to propose, but Mr. Duran, do you have a point of order, or are you looking to speak?
No, both.
Oh, well, then why don't you start with the point of order?
Well, speak, and perhaps you're going to answer my point of order. So you were about to say something, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, so I am, because I'm inclined, and again, I look for the room on this, I'm inclined just to kind of go through the list that I have and not start another list because I have people in waiting, Madame Secretary Gagné, but I am happy to start a third list if you prefer, but Mr. Duran, point of order.
So unless Mr. Genuis is amending the amendment of Mr. Nader, and I don't have it in writing, so I don't know if he's doing that. You're amending the amendment? You can figure it out the first time. And I just want to clarify, if he wants a carbon tax election, then he doesn't want to meet in January, obviously.
Okay, thank you. All right, I will, I'm going to proceed with the list I have. So, Mr. Genuis, do you have anything else to say to this,
I do have a number of other things to say.
Of course you do.
Yes.
All right, Mr. Genuis, you have the floor again. Then again, just to recap, Madame Secretary Gagné, Mr. Viz, Mr. McCauley, Mr. Cannings, and then Mr. Duran, I think.
Just to clarify. Sorry, Mr. Duran.
Order.
Give me a sec.
Order.
So we're going to take the previous speaking order for the First Amendment and transpose it onto the Second Amendment.
Yes. Okay.
Just to be clear.
Mr. Genuis, you still have the floor, and then after you, it's Madame Secretary Gagné.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, you said the First Amendment and the Second Amendment, and I thought we were in a...
We're now on your amendment to the amendment, which is the carbon tax election.
Okay. All right, the carbon tax election amendment. So I was concerned that Mr. Drouin was not accurately citing the Conservative priorities. He had them out of order. So just to clarify for his benefit, they are axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. He wasn't really listening, so maybe just Mr. Duran, they are axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. So I think he's got those now, and you know, I think you know, those are proposals that are resonating so much because in the last 9 years we have a government that has failed to axe the tax, fix the budget, and stop the crime.
Mr. Genuis has the floor.
Mr. Duran is getting it. He's getting it well. So I think there was some just discussion about the timing around hearings and a possible election. So I do think it's just important to clarify that. So this sub-amendment adds a proviso at the end of Section 1. And, you know, here's our position very clearly. Conservatives believe that in the context where rent is up, crime is up, that time is up. Time is up for this government. Canadians want a carbon tax election where they can vote for a new government that will axe the tax everywhere and for good. And Liberals have been desperately resisting putting their proposals to the people of this country. And we've seen, in fact, over the fall, not just the Liberals, by the way, but the NDP. The NDP, with great fanfare in August, said they were ripping up their coalition agreement. I think it came out later that they'd recorded that video about 6 weeks earlier, and they were getting ready to deploy it when they thought it was in their political interest to do it. So, and of course, they were desperate to deceive people in a Winnipeg by-election. So they claimed that they were tearing up their coalition agreement with the Liberals. And then after that by-election, they eagerly taped the coalition agreement back together, and we found ourselves in a situation where, despite promising the end of the relationship, they had secretly moved back in together and were voting together in lockstep on every significant matter. And it's because they want to avoid a carbon tax election, an election that clearly Canadians want, an election that would allow the people of Canada to express their priorities around axing the tax, building the homes, fixing the budget, and stopping the crime. So in the absence of a carbon tax election, Conservatives have continued to do our work in Parliament, but we've also continued to push to have that carbon tax election as soon as possible. And I can tell you, we had my Christmas open house at my constituency office on the weekend. We had, and I went to the Santa Claus parade in Fort Saskatchewan on the day before, on the Friday night. And the question I kept hearing from people is, when is the election going to come? I think there's a sense in my constituency and across the country that people are fed up with this government. They want to have that election, and they're asking me, when is this finally going to come? And in that light, we have, in fact, today a confidence motion, a motion that takes the words of the NDP leader from that infamous video where he allegedly tore up the coalition agreement, that takes his own words and gives the House of Commons an opportunity to vote non-confidence in the government simply through the application of his own words. And yet the NDP leader and his team have sold out again. They've said that they will not vote in favor of the Conservative non-confidence motion. So we will continue to push for a carbon tax election, but it seems that in light of the sentiments of Canadians at the moment, it's hard to get a group of turkeys to vote for Christmas, as they say. The Liberals and the New Democrats want to avoid a carbon tax election because they are fairly certain about what the verdict of the Canadian people would be, and so they are trying to put it off for as long as they can. This is why I do think the timeline here, Chair, needs to specify that when it comes to determining when the work of this committee could resume, that it would be after January 6th or after a carbon tax election. Obviously, the committee wouldn't meet in the middle of an election because the nature of our processes is that when an election takes place, Parliament dissolves, and we are, I think, formally no longer members of Parliament during the period of the election. We are candidates for election. Again, the Parliament doesn't exist. The government continues to exist. The executive continues to be, responsible for matters that may come up from time to time. But the Parliament doesn't exist. But I suspect that on some of these very serious matters, such as the very devastating Report 8 on the Canada Emergency Business Account, that is the sort of thing that, whatever the shape of the next Parliament, there would be value in us coming back to at that time, which is why I'm proposing this sub-amendment, which kind of develops on the very good work proposed in the amendment from my colleague. And Chair, I think we need to have a carbon tax election, and Canadians need to be able to decide, and the work of the committee should be able to continue. So with that, I'll cede the floor, and maybe you can add me to the list again because there are a few more things that I want to say, but I do see it's 1 o'clock now, so I think we're maybe close to time. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Januis. The committee is relieved you did not suggest we meet after December 26, and you graciously allowed us to wait until the new year. Madame Sécla Desgagnés, vous avez la parole, s'il vous plaît.
You have the floor. First, I'd like to clarify how much time we have left, because I know that usually our time would be up. Yes, we lost time during suspensions and delays, so maybe 15 to 30 minutes, maybe? All right. And I have a long list, so it's really if you have anything to say, but right now it's your turn, and then it'll be Mr. Kenning's turn. Well, first, I'm very disappointed that our meeting, today's meeting, was delayed again. Last time the motion was from the Conservatives. This time it's the Liberals, so it's twice now that we haven't been able to do our work. This time I wasn't able to ask even a single question to the witnesses, and that's what happened last time too. So we didn't hear from Mr. Doug McConaughey, or I wasn't able to ask any questions of him, even though he's key in the SDTC issue. In this motion, there are a few points that are relevant, namely that the wishes of the subcommittee must be respected, and that this was discussed at subcommittee, that is to prioritize CEBA. Once more, the decisions of the subcommittee are still private at this point. So thank you. Right. But still, it would be relevant to talk about it in committee, even if it was in camera, so that other members can discuss it too. Now, the fact that we are trying to conclude SDTC and ArriveCAN studies, those are the points of this motion. I know we're supposed to talk about sub-amendments that are not very relevant or interesting, nor interesting for this committee. It's still good to go ahead and mention that wanting to move ahead with these studies to complete them is very important to us, with the witnesses who had been invited. I think it's still relevant to remind people that it is very contradictory on the part of the Conservatives to prolong debate uselessly on this issue, knowing that we want to hold meetings to replace those that are being cancelled, essentially because of filibustering. I mean, it's very ironic. And why? It's so that we can sit and meet again during riding weeks when we are supposed to be with our constituents. I don't think, unless there's an emergency, that is required. And there's also always the 106.4 of standing orders that can be used if there's an emergency. So, I mean, point 9 could have been reworded, really. It would have been good to do so, I think, to be able to clarify and to avoid having meetings cancelled or made useless. and also that meetings not be held during weeks when we are supposed to be in our ridings with the people of our ridings. So I'm going to finish the debate on the sub-amendment, which is really not relevant. It's just a way to try to gain some time. Completely absurd, because we could have done the work during the hours that had been attributed to us. Thank you. Thank you.
And then after that, yes, go ahead, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a point of clarification, I think you said it in French, we have about 20 or 30 minutes remaining.
A little less than that. I don't generally like to yes or no, but I do have a long list. So if you'd like
right.
to make your points, and then
Well,
we can
let me-
always come back to it.
So the sub-amendment that we're debating today is really whether or not Canada is going to be given sufficient time to study the damning report from the Auditor General. In question period last week, I asked the Minister of Small Business essentially why they would allow a company like Accenture, which is verified by the Auditor General, to write their own contracts, set their own terms and conditions, and pay themselves whatever they felt was acceptable. I asked the Minister of Small Business how in the world she finds it acceptable that $3.5 billion of taxpayer money could be misused. In the words of the Auditor General, how we could have one of the largest social programs in the history of Canada show no value for money. I've asked the Minister of Small Business and officials here about the conflict of interest between Accenture and Export Development Canada. I state all this because these are serious questions, and we're at a time in Canada where people are divided. They're divided between the extremism of the Liberal Party, which is tearing new divides in Canadian society. Violence against women is up. Extortion in my community in the Fraser Valley is up over 300%. The RCMP have had to devote hundreds of new officers to deal with major issues related to crime. And I mention that because it gets down to the core of what many people are thinking. What the heck is the government of Canada doing? So we have the Auditor General come forward. She presents a bombshell report. And we as parliamentarians have an opportunity to either investigate, to get to the bottom of why some bad decisions were made, and understand what the consequences were, and hold relevant officials accountable, or we can continue down the path of divisiveness by the NDP Liberals, who are doing everything in their power to avoid possible corruption, but absolutely accountability for the operationalization of government programs. It's because of this that Canadians are divided, that Canadians are losing trust in the democratic process, that they feel that their voices aren't heard. All of us here, especially at Public Accounts, and I'm not a normal member of this committee, but the purpose of this committee is to do the hard work, to examine why decisions were made, to look at the line-by-line spending of government departments, to look back at why decisions were made, how they were made, and in the context in which they were made. But what we have here today is the NDP Liberals trying to avoid that accountability. So let's recap some of the main findings that the Auditor General wants us to be discussing. Questions that I wanted to ask the Auditor General Hogan today and officials from Finance Canada. Some of the main findings include, through the CEBA program, that although 91% of loan recipients met eligibility requirements under the CEBA program, the Office of the Auditor General found that the remaining 9% were ineligible recipients, amounting to $3.5 billion in loans. That's a fact that we're not studying. The non-deferrable expenses stream was intended to help small businesses cover a variety of expenses that could not be deferred during the pandemic, such as payroll, rent, insurance, and utilities. When introducing this stream, Export Development Canada introduced more prepayment controls, which required additional processes to determine eligibility, including assessing the validity of expenses documents submitted by applicants. However, the Office of the Auditor General found some issues with their implementation and found that about 19% should not have been deemed eligible based on the criteria of the program at the time and should be investigated further. This represents approximately $26,000 loans, or about $1.5 billion. 26,000 loans. I'm the critic for small business, and when one of the biggest complaints I receive from small businesses in our country is that when they get a question from Canada Revenue Agency, when they're contacted by the Government of Canada, it's basically they have to stop what they're doing. It might be a minor discrepancy, but it's at the discretion of an individual auditor to review how they were conducting their business. In some cases, this can mean major losses for a small business, but absolutely major inconveniences without any consequences for the auditors at CRA, even if they are found to have been completely in the clear. I want to apply that same type of pressure on the decision makers in government, because when $26,000 loans are deemed ineligible to the tune of $1.5 billion, that's a big concern. That's a big concern for the small businesses paying taxes and who have felt the wrath of CRA upon them throughout numerous times in their business career. According to the Office of the Auditor General, 90% of the errors were due to loans being wrongly assessed as eligible based on the documentation provided by the small businesses. The OAG further found that EDC approved loans based on the assessments performed by its vendors, even though documentation clearly indicated ineligibility or basic information was missing. For example, documents were accepted without a business name or for expenses outside of the eligible period of the program. In other words, Accenture wasn't doing their job with their sweetheart contracts that they got with EDC. EDC conducted no post-payment verification for the non-deferrable expenses stream, therefore did not discover the extent of their own errors. The Auditor General concluded that too much control given by EDC to a third-party vendor to administer CEBA contracts had grave consequences. EDC decided to make extensive use of external contractors to minimize the impact and separate the CEBA program from its own core operations because, according to EDC, it did not have the capacity to embed CEBA in its regular operations. This resulted in $230 million in administrative spending going to contracts with third parties, of which 91% was awarded to a single vendor. That is Accenture. Today we had Finance Canada officials before us, and my line of questioning was going to be focused on how these decisions were made, how EDC was first given authority to run this government program, and secondly, how EDC made the decisions to sole source most of it to a global multinational firm. These are important questions, and we're not getting to them. EDC was dependent on Accenture to deliver the CEBA program. In total, EDC awarded 19 non-competitive contracts to Accenture out of 48 CEBA-related contracts, representing approximately 92% of the total $342 million awarded in contracts to support the delivery of the CEBA program. EDC, DFC, and GAC, that's the Department of Finance and Global Affairs Canada, identified the reputational and financial risks
Chair.
of a sustained non-competitive...
1 second. Yeah, I have a point of order, yes, please.
I appreciate Mr. Rivas's intervention as it is, but I don't see how it speaks to anything in this motion. I mean, what I've been hearing for the past however long he's been speaking is about things that are not being discussed in this motion at all.
Well, I think he's referring to the study on on CEBA.
The point is,
Canada
Chair, that we are
Emergency
on a
Business Account.
sub-amendment. We are on an amendment to an amendment.
All right.
And that is not the scope of what Mr. Viss is saying.
Oh, very good. I was allowing a little latitude, just he's first time speaking, but all right, very well then, Mr. Viz, if you want to kind of focus on the sub-amendment to the amendment with respect to having a carbon tax election and why, well, as in the words of the amendment the sub-amendment is why that's necessary.
All right, well,
Over to you, sir.
I would, well,
Keep it short, buddy.
if the...
Order, please, all around. Mr. Viz, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, the purpose of me outlining the key findings from the Auditor General speaks to the need for public accounts to address the very important findings of the Auditor General. The reason, and if they don't want to discuss these issues, then indeed we can go to a carbon tax election. I think we're coming to that, Mr. Chair, that Canadians, per my previous points, do not have trust in this government to manage public finances in an efficient way. And that is why one of the core tenets of the Conservative Party right now is to fix the budget, along with a carbon tax under our commitment and our desire to have a carbon tax election is to fix the federal budget. And what I'm experiencing here today as a non-regular member of Public Accounts Committee is that what we're doing is in the best interest of Canadians, because the Liberal and NDP members and their coalition want to avoid accountability. They are obfuscating the parliamentary process to review and approve of taxpayer money to a point that the average Canadian would say our governmental system is corrupt. If we can't examine in detail how $3.5 billion was given to ineligible businesses, what can we do as a country? We are a G7 nation, but we don't act like one. Primarily because we can't get to the bottom of how public money is used. There is so many layers of decision-making that are not being exposed to the public, even though at a time, and as we reflect on the second week of Advent, of hope during the second week of Advent, many Canadians are without hope. Food bank usage is through the roof. Violence against women is through the roof. Extortion is through the roof. Child poverty is rising at alarming rates. And why? Because we're not taking proper account of how money is being used. Our men and women in uniform serving in the Baltic states right now are having to resort to buying their own equipment because the government can't get its accounts in order. The government of Canada is not operationalizing their responsibilities in a way that is acceptable to the average Canadian citizen. So I will continue. EDC, the Department of Finance and GAC.
Could I ask, this is a plea from the chair, would you yield your time? We are running out of time. I would like to hear from Mr. Cannings, just to get a flavor of the room. This is what I try to govern this committee with consent. I will come back to you.
Point of order, Chair.
No,
it's inappropriate to cut off another member.
It's a request, Mr. McCauley, and I can make it. He can certainly decline, and if he does, that's within his rights. But I would like to hear from Mr. Cannings, if that's possible. Mr. Viz, you can certainly decline me, but I would appreciate as the chair for you to yield the floor, and I will certainly put you back on again to pick it up exactly where you left off.
Just a point of clarification. If I yield the floor to Mr. Cannings, will you return to me after Mr. Cannings is finished speaking?
Yes, I will.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll yield the floor.
All right. Mr. Cannings, you have the floor. I'm eager to hear your thoughts on this amendment to the motion, please. Over to you.
Okay, I will try to be as brief as possible to give Mr. Viss back his chance to go on and on and on and on about things. But if I may just say off the top, I think this whole discussion we're having over the last two meetings would have been completely avoided had we had a discussion about the report of the subcommittee when it was handed out, because I think you would find, and I can't comment on the contents or what went on at subcommittee because it was in camera, but I think you would find that certainly I was surprised at the report, which I thought was incomplete, didn't really cover all the issues that were discussed there and all the conclusions. And we could have come up with a plan of work that I think everybody would be happy with. At least I thought we had accomplished that in the subcommittee meeting, but that obviously isn't the case. So I'll just start with that. Normally, again, I'm new on this committee. Normally when we have a subcommittee meeting at other committees, that's the first thing on the agenda when we come back is subcommittee met, here's this, let's have a short in-camera meeting about, our work plans or whatever the subcommittee met about. So I'll just say that this, to me, was completely avoidable. This whole back and forth, having to have witnesses stand down, I just really find it bad management. And so, I think what we're seeing here is, motions that try to fix this, and yet we're just going in circles. So, and I'll just say what I meant to do in my short time speaking here was just to put forward an amendment to the motion to fix all this, to make everybody happy. But now I'm assuming I don't have that opportunity because we're talking about a sub-amendment. And that's, again, Mr. Genuis comes on and puts forward a totally ridiculous sub-amendment that was clearly just designed to stop myself or other members from making substantive amendments. So again, that's all I'll say here because, I think that we could fix this fairly easily by changing the motion to make it clear that, when it says in places that, I can send on my sub-amendment that I had all prepared if you like, but just to change the places where it said there shall be no more meetings, that you add in language that says, except for meetings that flow from a 1064. Just to show that we're not trying to guillotine debate on a subject, but if something important, as Mr. Nader said, if something, new came up, we could say, yes, we should be talking about this, and we could be talking about it during the break if it was so important. But, just to make all this, well, I won't try to be short, and I won't go into try to use stronger language, but this I just find extraordinarily frustrating. And so I'm just hoping that we can fix this. We could have fixed this quickly had we had a chat about the subcommittee meeting. We could have fixed this quickly if we had some cooperative amendments so that everybody would be happy, so that we knew we could come back if necessary. But we have gone down a rabbit hole, and I'm not going to blame people and name names, but it's just really, really disappointing what I've been seeing the last two meetings. That's all I'll say.
Thank you.
And if I have an opportunity at some other time,
sure,
at that amendment, I will, but it looks like it's not going to happen today.
Thank you. We're literally out of time. So, Mr. Viz, I'm not going to give you the floor back because we're out of time. We will pick this up again. Or the meeting is adjourned. We are going to try for line by line. Mr. Cannings, I will just reference your comments about the subcommittee. It had been my intention to bring that up at the end of the meeting, our previous one, to avoid disrupting witnesses, which has now happened twice, which I, like you, am not very pleased about. It is extremely rare for this committee to turn away deputy ministers and the Auditor General. We've now done that twice. This meeting is adjourned. See you Wednesday. Thank you.